Jacob Winograd, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Really happy to have you back. It's been a lot of me looking at you and some of the other folks in the LP. The drama surrounding, what Angela did with free. I mean, we know. I mean, spoiler alert. Trump freed Ross. So that question's been disposed of. Seemed like it's a pretty contentious topic amongst libertarians. But I just wanted to bring you in because I'm trying to figure out what the heck happened behind the scenes, man. I'm not an LP operative, and I just kind of, other than what I see, it's going across Twitter. I don't have really much of a clue what's going on other than people are big mad, or they have been.
Yeah, well, I guess the long short of it is that Austin and Angela had an opportunity to meet with Trump at some point. I don't remember the exact day or month, but in the months leading up to convention, and had a chance to raise a bunch of issues to him. Talked about him coming to convention because he was trying to appeal to libertarians and libertarian voting bloc, and one of the things that came up was freeing Ross, which was one of the things that Trump was actually very enthusiastic in saying that he'd want to do. Talked about that at the speech he gave at the LNC, which was like one of the few times that there were no libertarians booing, despite what some people tried saying on X. Because there were some, I got so irritated. Like, it was so funny. Like, the Liberty Movement spends so much time fighting, right? That anytime we stop fighting each other to collectively say something, it's true. So, like, we're all having all this fighting. And then I think it was Aaron McIntyre said, well, Trump doesn't have to free Ross because, like, you guys just booed him when he said it. And then everyone was like, no, that's not what happened. There was booing at other times in the speech. But when he said free Ross, every single person down there that in that room, at least libertarians, I can't say much about the MAGA people that were there, but every libertarian was sitting there chanting free Ross and cheering that. And I don't know, like, even the most, like, I don't know, hater type libertarians, or you want to call them, even the most, like, black pilled, like, anti-Mises caucus, anti-Angela types out there are all happy that Ross is free. And I've even seen a lot of Angela's critics say that Angela deserves at least some of the credit. Her and Austin, and I guess, like, by extension, maybe the Mises Caucus coalition, the LP, deserve some credit in helping to make enough noise and get this in front of the right people, including President Trump, to help finally make it happen. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the long short of what happened in terms of how it involves the LP and Angela. And even when Trump made the announcement, he credited the libertarian movement. So, I mean, people can, I guess, debate over, like, who gets the most credit, right? And I don't really care to get too involved in that. I think it's just fair to say that, like, listen, like, you could say that Angela and the Mises Caucus has been a failed experiment within the Libertarian Party, but they did get this win in terms of they helped to make it happen. I just don't think that there's any way that you can deny that. And I think, and like I said, I think some of the critics have even admitted, like, yeah, you know what? I think every other thing you've done has been terrible, but this one thing was pretty decent, at least. So
Yeah, that's one thing that I think that you're right. Like, we all agree on is that was an awesome thing to see. And I have to say, man, like, and I've admitted this in public that I was skeptical that he was going to do it. I really was, because it didn't make a ton of sense to me because it goes so against his brand. Right, his brand is law and order. His brand is, pro police and very, very tough on crime and particularly drug crime, and especially in this election. There's these promises that we're going to go back to Ronald Reagan era dare type of drug campaigns, and we're talking about literal warfare on cartels. Right, like like labeling them terrorist organizations. That was all in his platform leading up to the election. So it's freeing somebody like Ross, whose Silk Road was clearly involved in the drug trade. That goes absolutely against his instincts, everything he stands for, what his base, what's popular with his base, and he's a lame duck president. I mean, if you believe he's not going to go for a third term, which most people do, but that really gave me a lot of skepticism because at the time it was easy to forget that he was somebody who was under multiple felonies pending. It looks like basically he had to win the presidency or he was going to be behind bars. Like, it was like a pretty binary decision tree here. And so I really so super happy that my instincts were incorrect, but leading up to it, I was pretty publicly skeptical about it, but I was certainly happily surprised. I think everyone else I've talked to who was kind of more on my side of that debate, they all think that was a great thing.
Yeah, that's been my thing. I mean, I don't know anyone who said it was a bad thing. The biggest debate just seems to be over who gets the most credit, and saying that like it doesn't make up for all the other bad things. That like there are some people that are happy that Ross is free, but take the position that ultimately the trade-offs in terms of what maybe Angela and the Mises Caucus did to the LP over whatever span of time, the last all 2 years of the Mises Caucus takeover, or at least over this last election cycle, has been, a net loss. Or that Trump winning, even though he freed Ross, is still a net loss for liberty. But no one is saying that the freeing of Ross itself is a bad thing, as far as I can tell. That seems rather silly. And I'll be honest, like I myself, as I'm evaluating these things, and I have to be upfront with my biases. Like I was part of like the early days of the Mises Caucus, maybe not like the first wave, but kind of like the pre, like the Mises Caucus really had like a surge in like late 2020, early 21, and I kind of got involved a little bit before that, and I was definitely at least a key player in my state. And I have a lot of relationships with people such as Angela, such as Michael Heiss. And I even with all that said, and I've said this to them before, so it's not anything new, I have mixed feelings about just looking back over the last couple years, and I don't think everything was done exactly right. I think even Mike and Angela would admit that mistakes were made. Though and we don't see eye to eye on everything. But I think it's at least fair to look back and wonder, like, okay, what's the state of the LP? Maybe this was a win, but does that mean that this is the strategy going forward? I don't know. There are good faith concerns and questions about that, and I'm even still like, I've taken a bit of a step back in terms of direct involvement in the LP, just because it's just gotten too crazy for me. I have other things I want to focus on, and frankly, I'm just a little tired of the fight. I've been in it for too long. And it's like, I got 5 kids, and like, I got to fight with my kids, right? And then going to LP conventions and meetings is just like fighting with kids more, except like, they're not really my kids, and they don't listen to me even less than my kids listen to me. So it's like, you know what? Like, I don't have the kind of time and energy like I used to invest in this kind of stuff, but still have feelings about what the LP should do, what political strategies are and aren't viable. I think there are better, put it this way, I think there are good and bad examples of how to disagree with the last 2 years of the LP strategy and the Mises Caucus, and I do try to distinguish between those two camps, the good criticisms and the bad criticism. And I would say, as far as I've seen you be critical at times, I'd lump you in the good faith camp in terms of not always agreeing with things the LP has done or the Mises Caucus has done. But it's like you have reservations, you don't know how you feel about certain strategies, but you're also like not sitting there attacking people personally and rooting for everything to fail all the way as things are transpiring, which I think is the more reasonable way to go about it. I wish more people from both sides of the divide in the movement could do that, right? Like, I didn't really like the Chase Oliver campaign, but I wasn't sitting there like, I hope he fails. Yeah. Like, I hope he crashes and burns, anything like that. So
yeah, thank you for that. And I really try. First of all, like, number one, I'm ignorant of so much of what goes on in the LP, because I know you're an anarchist, I'm an anarchist, and I look at political action. I've always viewed it as it's antithetical to liberty. It's not a vehicle generally for maintaining or restoring liberty. It doesn't seem to me like it's effective. And I look at the LP's track record, and I understand it's a 2-party duopoly and there's a whole bunch of headwinds and things. Like, I get all of that. That's all baked into it. I philosophically, I don't see voting for a particular type of government as a long-term strategy for improving the state of liberty. I don't. So I haven't paid attention to a lot of the politics. But more recently, I'm starting to know some of the people in this space because I've got the podcast, and I want to give people a fair shake, including Angela, who seems like a really polarizing figure. I've been trying to get her on the show. I hope she comes on at some point, because I think that, like, literally this is the only victory I can remember of the LP ever. I've been watching you guys since the 70s, man. Like, I'm an old dude, and there's just you don't do anything. It's like you said, it's a bunch of methed out toddlers in a room, and I get it. That's what liberty is. Like, everyone's going their own way. Everyone has their own opinions and views, and there's all of this infighting around strategy. And I think there's I swear to God, man, there's something with libertarians. We're autistic or something. There's something not right. And you get hyper focused on these little subcomponents and minutia of procedure. And then I'm starting to watch Karen Ann Harlow's fighting with, and then there's all these like lawsuits and crazy shit. And I'm like, guys, like we're not aligned at all, and I think you're missing the entire picture. And so what I've been trying to do, and I posted a couple of videos from, it was like my mea culpa, which is like, hey, I've been guilty of it too, but like, we've got to all get on the same page, at least broadly, with respect to advancing liberty, or we're going to be dead. Like, this is not going in a good direction. And I think I called out somebody like Josie or somebody, or the Being Libertarian page, like the most kind of like on the more status side of the libertarian spectrum. It's like, those people are welcome too. Right, like everyone's got to be, like, oh, you've seen that thing, that purity test, and it's not like it's not important. It's not like it's something that is completely unimportant to the discussion. But I think people hyper fixate on being cooler or more pure or whatever than somebody else, where they don't realize that, look, if we get to a state where a disagreement between Josie and me matters in the real world, like we've gone that far,
yes,
like. Yes. I'm a happy dude, man. Like, I'm happy, and fine, cool. I'll stab her in the neck at that point. But right now, like, it's so dumb. It's so dumb to have these arguments about this hypothetical land where do we have this teeny government, or do we have no government at all? Like, those discussions are completely unimportant right now, and it feels like nobody sees the bigger picture. And it's like, if you are on the liberty spectrum at all, no pun intended, we should be pulling together. Like, we should be moving that direction, because like I said, there's a debate about how far we go, but dude, we are so far from anything approximating liberty at this point. Like, it's pathetic, and it's sad, and it really upsets me, because we could be doing something, and other people are out there doing things. I mean, you look at even what Elon did with Trump. Like, say what you will, like, I've got differences with the way they're approaching things, but they're going for it. They're actually making some sort of impact, right? And we're over here in a little corner, like, fighting amongst ourselves and doing essentially nothing. It just it rubs me the wrong way in a serious fashion.
So there's a lot there, but I think the main thing I want to say to that is agree with most of what you said, and follow that up by saying that not only do I think that we need to be a little bit more like recognizing that a lot of the ideological differences aren't, like, if we ever did get to a point where that mattered, that would be like, hey, we've come a long way, right? Because a lot of these things don't particularly matter in the here and now, although they can matter to a small extent, which we can touch back on that later if you want. But I think this also matters in terms of what strategies libertarians pursue, because I'll be honest, I'm a bit gray-pilled on all the strategies. It's like, because people will say, I don't think, you said you don't think political action works, you think it's antithetical. I understand that position. I used to when I first became an anarchist, I was an anti-political anarchist. I thought agorism was kind of the only way forward. But I'll be honest, like, I look at all the strategies, and some of them are, I mean, there's really not a lot. There's political action in various forms. There's agorism. There's just kind of like, well, it's a multi-generational thing. There's maybe collapsitarian is sort of a subset of a kind of not really a strategy. It's just like a, hey man, it's all going to crash, and then we just hope that in the rubble that anarchy, spontaneous order takes over. And I go, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, here's the truth: we live under the biggest state in probably world history, and we look throughout history, and more or less states in various forms are not just the majority, but like the overwhelming majority. I mean, like 99% of what has dominated the human scene for as far back as we have recorded human civilization. So it kind of feels like no strategy is really proven to be effective, right? So we're kind of like having a fight, or like, what's the most effective, when it kind of seems like what I think we need ultimately is to understand that just as we can't centrally plan society, we really can't centrally plan what it is actually going to take to get to a freer society, let alone a fully free society, whatever that looks like, depending on if you're ANCAP or minarchist. But the point being that, like, we're all just experimenting. And I think it's okay to find your niche, or niche, however you want to say it, and say, like, this is what I think I'm the most effective in. This is what I think is the most return on investment. I think this is the better strategy than this one. And, like, I tend to kind of have less optimism towards the agorist types, but I'm not out there like raging against agorists, because it's just like, why would I? Like, and I don't think they do zero good. And I guess I just wish that could go the other direction, and understand there's different types of these things, right? Like, not all agorists are created equally. Not all political strategies are created equally. And I'll be honest, that's part of my mixed feelings on, like, the Mises Caucus and the LP, because I am rather black-pilled on a lot of the political strategy. The only reason I got sucked in at all was because they seemed to offer something that was different, which was the idea of the decentralized revolution, which was nullification at the local level, and focusing really hard on the local elections. And all the national stuff was just supposed to be like the funnel that drove down to that local action. And some stuff has happened locally. I'm not going to say zero has happened. I know there's been elected libertarians across the country, and there's been some legislative wins. It hasn't quite worked out, but to be frank, it hasn't worked out the way that it was originally envisioned. Some of that's not, entirely within people's control. The plan was to run Dave Smith, have a really big national campaign, and use that to really ramp things up. That didn't work out. Then Angela decided to pivot and do this really, controversial federal, kingmaker kind of strategy to gain concessions. Some of them seemingly have worked out. And I like that, but I had mixed feelings about, like, can that be repeated? Is that sustainable for multiple reasons? And that's not where I'm putting all my eggs in terms of, like, the political action basket. It was never about getting concessions at the federal level and Doge and all this. Like, that's all cool. It's like eye candy, man, right? It's like, man, Elon's tweeting Ron Paul and, all these libertarian ideas, abolishing the Department of Education and whatnot are out there. It's cool. It tickles my ears. But, like, I don't have any faith that that's the path that's going to actually get us to a free society. It might help some people on the margins. It would be ideal if it was really just making more room for the local action stuff, which I think could be more effective to happen. But unfortunately, so much of and this is partly why I stepped out of the party, because I was like, I'm spending half my time just fighting libertarians. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm done with that. Like, I just, like, I got involved in this to do local action, to fight against state and federal level tyranny at the local level. Instead, I'm just continually fighting a civil war in the LP. And despite the fact that I have sympathies with one side more than the other, I was just like, I just don't have it in, like, I don't hate the other side enough, or just have the time to be like, yeah, I'm going to keep doing that. And that's part of my reservations, is that, like, we just don't agree. Like, the movement, the party, they just don't agree. And it's like, it doesn't matter what we do. If we don't agree, and if it's just constant civil war, I mean, it almost sounds like I'm, like, it's funny, like, I don't like Abraham Lincoln, but I think his quote about a house divided cannot stand has merit in terms of talking about the movement and the party. Like, divided, we won't stand. We just won't. But I don't know what the path forward is. Like I told you on Twitter, I think the other week, I was like, I'm black-pilled on what the path forward is. I think there's some reasonable people, like you and me, like we can sit down and talk and agree to disagree, and we don't commit friendly fire. But there's a lot of people on both sides, or I guess there's more than one side in reality, who can't agree to stop the friendly fire, and I've kind of given up trying to convince them. So...
Yeah, yeah, you said a lot there, and there's a couple of things. One is I don't think that there is. I don't think the solution is a strategy solution, right? Like what we're trying to aim for, a freer society, it doesn't come from political parties. Like I think there's a place for political parties, but I think that it is more for spreading the message of liberty, right? So I lived through the horrible, George W. Bush years where everybody was a neocon, right? And then I saw Ron Paul, who I'd been aware of. Now I'm a long-term libertarian, so I was aware of him long before that. Come on the stage in 2008 and get booed, but it was like through his campaign he attracted so many people who are in the Libertarian Party today, or who consider themselves libertarians or ANCAPs or whatever. They start. He's like the gateway drug, right? Which is why I said there's room for the being libertarians and the Josies of the world. Like there's room for everybody. And I wish that we could for a second zoom out and be like, look, we did not all, like, let's say you're the most pure libertarian there is, whatever that might be. You did not arrive there on day one, right? There's a progression, whether you came from the left, whether you came from the right, whether you're apolitical and you came through the philosophy door like I did, understand, ethical philosophy around the non-aggression principle. That's how you got into that space, or whatever it is. Or whether you're in economics or not, I don't care. You come from a bunch of different routes, but it's never like you arrive at this perfect libertarian state, if it exists, overnight. Like there's a transformation, and there's also a spectrum of people getting stuck at certain, like some people have issues. They got some wedge issue and they can't move past it. And they're like, well, I can't get there. I'm a minarchist, and here's my things, and here's why. And it's like, we got to be cool with that. Like we've got to be adults. I think everybody has treated libertarianism almost like a quasi religion. You're in this camp, you're on this team, and you got to convert people. I hear this phrase all the time, convert, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? This is not an ideology. This is not a religion. This is not what this is. This is not a cult. But people treat it that way, and there's so much of this in group, out group stuff. Like we're in this group over here, and if you're not with us, and the hell with you. And it's at some point, people are going to have to grow up, because nobody's going to take any of us seriously. How are you going to be an example like Ron Paul talks about? Like the best way, to get people to think about your ideas in a positive light is by setting a good example. And if we're not doing that, and we're not, like it's the worst example possible, and it's always in public, and it's always the most disgusting, like just mudslinging type of stuff. It's like, guys, like stop it. This is absolutely reprehensible, and we're not doing ourselves any favor. And we claim to be, acting out of a sense of passion because we so care about liberty deeply. Well, if you do, stop being a creep, stop being a complete jerk to everybody, and start working together with people that you might have a disagreement with. Like I get so insanely frustrated.
Well, let me give you an example. So I think the last time I was on your show, I had a lot of, because I think it was like right after the convention, and Chase was the nominee, and I don't think I was nasty towards him, but I think I said a lot of things about why I have a hard time supporting him as a candidate. And I tried to give him a shot. I had him on my show. We had a good conversation. We had a good conversation when I met him at my state convention as well. Don't dislike Chase, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I just could not endorse him as a candidate to vote for, and say that I feel like he's out there really championing the message that I want to amplify, put my name behind. But if you go back over my X feed, over his campaign, I think you will see me say more positive things about him and retweeting him over the course of his campaign when he had really good takes than you will ever see me criticizing him. And even my criticisms were generally, I'm not going to say listen, Twitter makes us snarky, right? So sometimes that comes out, but I don't think I was ever nasty to him. I was never calling him names, never mudslinging, because I understand that, first of all, that's not helpful. And secondly, my main trepidation in introducing our ideas, our philosophy, the legal theory, the movement to my friends, to my family, to strangers on the internet is not my ability to articulate the ideas, is not all the objections that I'm sure you've heard for a lot longer than me in terms of just every reason why we need a state and all the name calling that can come your way, you're just naive, you're utopian, and blah, 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 blah. None of that. The biggest apprehension I have is, man, it's gonna be really embarrassing when they figure out what a shit show the movement is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because that is the biggest. Like, listen, I don't think that this proves a free society can work. But talk about leading with your worst foot forward,
Yep.
making the worst first impression to say, hey, we don't need central planning to run a society, that free markets, private property rights, not aggression principle, and voluntary interaction can be the way that society organizes itself, and you can have social cooperation and peace among people who have different beliefs. And meanwhile, the people who all claim to share the same belief cannot stop smearing each other in public. And listen, I'm not naive. I understand Republicans and Democrats go at each other, and there's some of that on the main stage during the election cycle. But you know what? When it comes down to accomplishing their tasks and like really going after each other, there's a reason why a lot of people on the right and left hate Trump, because Trump kind of broke this rule. They generally, even if they're like a little hateful for a little while, they generally don't do that kind of stuff. Right? Like they now behind closed doors and backroom deals, yeah, all that happens. But for the most part, they're like, hey, we're a team. Even if I hate you and you hate me, we're on this team, we're in this coalition, so we're going to do our best to, if we can't say anything nice, we won't say anything at all, right? With libertarians, we can't do that. I don't know what it is. I know a lot of people say like it's the autistic thing or something. I don't know what it is. But it's a problem, and that's my biggest trepidation, right? Is like when my pastor, who knows I'm a libertarian, asks me like, "Hey, so what's going on with the Libertarian Party? Who's your nominee? Like, what do libertarians think about this?" And I'm just like, it's just like I don't want to lie, but like, how much positive spin can you put on something before you're lying, right?
Exactly.
Like, you almost have to be a used car salesman when you're talking about the Liberty Movement or the Libertarian Party. Like, man, you can fit so many autists in this bad boy.
That's one of my favorite memes, dude. I completely agree, and which leads me to another question. Since it's been on my mind a lot, and I know that you're a Christian. I'm not. I'm an atheist, or I'm agnostic. Technically, I think everyone should be agnostic. That's the right position. But I don't have a particular God belief. I just had Dr. Lawrence Krauss on a couple of days ago. He came out to Nashville, and that was awesome. And so I'm thinking about this a lot. And I asked him some ethical questions, and he kind of didn't have much of an answer. And it led me to think about goodness in society, right? Because I think we're trying to attack the issue through strategy and political stuff, and try to, put the ideas forward and convince people. And the more I've thought about this, and this has been a years-long process for me now, the more I've been convinced that Americans just don't like freedom, because it comes with responsibility on the other side of the coin. And that we've become, as a whole, this is generalizing, I know there's some great people, as a whole, our country is not full of really great people anymore, by and large. Like, you look at our country, we're like 60-something% obese, and like people are not taking care of their health, and the morality is clearly declined. Like, we are in a complete tailspin. It's nothing but hedonism, licentiousness, and I think that there's definitely been a negative impact directly due to the decline in religiosity. The fact that, religion in general seems to be sort of on its way out. I think that whole secularism has been tried, and it feels like it's been a little bit of a failed experiment. And so I'm somebody, sitting on this quote unquote other team, who's looking at this going like, there's probably some real social utility to this. And so I want to get your take, is like how do you think the sort of interplay between faith and religion, whatever we're going to call it, and the state of society is tied into this appearance to not be attracted by the ideas of liberty?
Yeah, no, it's a very deep subject. I remember back in before I was podcasting, the days of Jordan Peterson debating Sam Harris and intellectual dark web in its heyday, and these were the type of conversations and debates they were having, right? A lot of people thinking that, like, even if they couldn't convince themselves to like actually take the metaphysical claims of the Bible and believe them in a personal way, that like at the very least, those stories had archetypal truths, and that there was a utility, almost like what Jordan Peterson would say, and also to some extent, crap, I'm forgetting his name. It'll come to me later. But
Jonathan
arguing
Pageau?
that not Pageau. It's another like kind of more kind of atheistic scientist who did a bunch of studies on this. His name will probably like pop into my head halfway through the interview, and someone Jordan Peterson. Haidt. Jonathan Haidt. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I just like it just was on the tip of my tongue. I couldn't think of it. Who say like, listen, like whatever. Jesus, they don't think Jesus was probably real, but like he didn't do all these miracles. He didn't if he died on a cross, he certainly wasn't born again. But like whatever, like the religion of Christianity, the biblical narrative and whatnot, like this metaphysical substrate is just needed for society to function, and there could be something in the evolutionary biology of human beings that is sort of like evolved to need these sort of guiding myths is the way they put it, right? And so I obviously think that it goes much deeper than that. I think there are spiritual reasons for that as well. But as a Christian, the Christian belief is that these are just kind of layers of reality that sort of stack, right? Like I kind of think that what Jordan and Haidt and others are saying is true. It's just that's like the tip of the iceberg. It's like I do think you could say that our biology is somewhat evolved around these things, but it's kind of evolved around them because I think the physical interacts with the spiritual, and that's obviously getting into supernatural, and can you prove the supernatural? And
well, first of all, I got to interrupt you, man. Like, I just want to say, you can just speak plainly, because I'm not one of those Reddit atheists. Like, I'm an open and curious person, and I'm a good faith actor, and I'm not looking to debunk or change anyone's mind. If anything, I'm looking to have my mind changed. Like, so I'm completely open to these ideas.
So let me put it this way: I think that to the heart of your question, in terms of like, people seem to hate liberty, and is the sort of decreasing of Christianity while secularism rises a reason for that. I think that's part of it. I also think to some extent it's simultaneously, and these are related, right? The rise of secularism was correlated with what I would call the dilution, or really the distortion of Christianity in the West, and that American Christianity, Western Christianity, maybe didn't completely distort it, but distorted it enough that it started to sort of lose its cultural power. Certainly then some political mishaps and whatnot that took place as well.
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah, I think.
What do you mean by that exactly? Is this sort of like the fractionalization or balkanization of the faith into all these different denominations? Is that what you're talking about, or is it some sort of like deviation from something that you consider to be more ideal as far as representative of Christianity?
Yeah, no. So I'm not Catholic or Orthodox. So I wouldn't blame it on the balkanization, as you put it, of Christianity. Although we can touch on that later if you want. There's some stuff there, but I think it's more just to the forgetting what the gospel message is primarily about, and this is something that transcends denomination divisions within Christianity, because at some point the American experiment kind of fused with Christianity, and American Western Christians kind of started to view America as almost like a modern Israel, as like this chosen nation that was supposed to, like, just usher in, goodness and peace and liberty to the world, and connecting that to their faith. But the gospel message was always to transcend nations, and the biblical narrative has always warned against the danger of this state. And I think that when you, just as bad as I think that, I think the classic argument is that, if you don't have a sovereign, then the state just easily fills in that gap,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think also, if you don't have a good sovereign, if you dilute the Christian message by making it a nationalist message, by mixing religion with the state, that also misses the point. You brought up how people don't want liberty, And there's this great passage, I don't know if you've heard it. It's one Christian anarchists like myself cite a lot, 1 Samuel 8. And it's the passage where the Israelites first ask for a king. And they basically go to Samuel and say, like, listen, like, so up until this point, they're just ruled by judges who were just like prophets or people appointed by God to settle disputes. But they're not rulers in a statist sense. So they go to Samuel and say, like, your sons are not, like, they were corrupt. Like, they weren't judging well. They were taking bribes. They were not being good judges. And so they said, we're tired of this system. We want to have a king, like all the other nations do. And then Samuel goes to God, and God's like, well, you know, I understand why you're upset. They're rejecting me as their king, so fine, give them what they want, but warn them. And he gives us this long list, which you'd think Rothbard wrote this when he describes all the ways the king is going to take their stuff, make them fight. He's going to take your children to fight on the front lines of his wars, take the best of your flocks and your fields for him, and you will be his slaves. Is how he ends it. But then the people refuse to listen to Samuel, and they say, no, we want a king over us, so we'll be like the other nations, and then the king will go out before us and fight our battles. And I think that kind of gets at the heart of what you're saying. And this is like something that this is when I say American Christianity distorts it, it's because they've kind of missed the point of the Bible gives us a warning about the danger of statism. It's not just a problem with monarchy, is that when people don't self-govern, because self-governing is hard, and they want to petition to a strong man to take care of them, to take care of the problems. And that's what the state does. It comes in and it says, you have these problems, you want these things. And with America, it's almost flashy, right? Because it's like, oh, well, we give you freedom, right? We give you liberty, even though it's not what the founding fathers believed at all, right?
Liberty
they understood
TM.
the problem. Right, yeah. And so that's a big part of the problem. It's not just the rise of secularism, it's the fall of actual Christianity and the idea of that, and this isn't to say, like, well, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. The point just being that the Christian mantra, or the Christian anarchist mantra, which I think just is a Christian mantra, is no king but Christ. Like, all the people were trending over the last year saying Christ is king, and I kept on, like, almost ad nauseum, like, right. And as a logical entailment of that, if Christ is king, then no one else can rightfully claim that type of authority, which is not the only reason, but I think it's one of the easiest and fundamental reasons why I think Christians need to be anarchists, is because if we understand that Christ is king, then no human can have that kind of authority. And not just world history, biblical history bears that out, because the monarchy was a disaster for Israel. Every single king fell short, fell into sin, led the nation in idolatry and sin. They got conquered, they got exiled. It wasn't good. And the whole point of the Old Testament narrative, and I'll end on this, the whole point of the Old Testament narrative was to kind of sell this message, which I think anarchists who even aren't sold on the Christian message yet would appreciate. Because I'm sure you hear the objection a lot, like, you know, well, I'm sure, like, anarchy sounds nice, but that's kind of this utopian, right?
I hate that.
And we say, like, you know, no, the utopian idea is that you can invoke a central planner who knows how to run everything and it's just going to work out great. Well, that's kind of the biblical message here, with an added twist at the end. Because before the king, there were problems in Israel in the time of the judges. But the introduction of the king doesn't solve any of those problems, it makes it worse. And then it points to the people's need for a perfect king, which is only fulfilled with Christ himself, who is not a king of this world. So basically, it's the same lesson that we anarchists say, which is that anarchy is not utopia. It's just understanding the state never makes anything better, right? And the Christian anarchist just adds on to that and to say that, and it points to our need for a perfect king who cannot be a fully human king, but has to be fully human and fully divine, and he has to reign rightly, and the only one capable of that is Christ. So that's not like me doing it's the opposite of me doing a modern twist of Christianity. It's actually me appealing to the oldest understanding of Christianity possible, because if you understand what the term gospel means, and you go to the first time that Jesus goes out and preaches the good news, right, the gospel, he's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. the kingdom of God is at hand, and that's what he was saying there. And so the gospel message is it it's not a political message, but it has political ramifications, which is partly why he got killed, because he was going around proclaiming. He wasn't just going around proclaiming, "I'm going to forgive people's sin," although he did do that. He said, I'm the king. Like when he was questioned by Pilate, he's like, "Well, are you?" And he's like, "You said I am." Like, so, yes.
Yeah, you said a lot there. So let me unpack a couple. Actually, let me add on a little bit. So this is super interesting because I was talking to Dr. Krauss about this exact subject, and he agrees, believe it or not. He was like, he actually debated on the affirmative side where the resolution was human beings are inherently religious. And so he accepts and he understands that he believes, much like I do, that religion is an evolved mechanism. There's some social utility that helped propagate our genes forward, that held society together, some cohesive element that made us better off for it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be ubiquitous across the world, which it is, right? And so, and I said to him, like, well, okay, well, why not just be more forgiving or tolerant towards religion, or maybe accept it as a social good? And he wouldn't have it, because I even walked him through the rise of wokeism. Like this is a mini religion that spontaneously emerged from a quote unquote secular group of people. And he's like, yep, 100%. That's what it is. This is a religious mind virus that popped up and spread instantly. And I think he's been dinged by it pretty severely, right? And he's even writing a whole book. I think it's coming out in June about it. And so he gets it. He gets all that stuff, but he seems to think that there's rationality is the way out of that. He seems to think, oh, well, yeah, but wokeism didn't have, thousands of years behind it to get entrenched, and we can just squash these out as they emerge. And it's like, I don't believe that's true at all, man. I think we're going to see, plethora of these little quasi religions. I think some of the trans stuff is very similar to that too. That is, you look at all the sort of components of what creates a religion, essentially. Like, you have it, these things spontaneously emerge, they just pop up, and you don't know what the ramifications are, other than we're going to have a more and more fragmented society, right? So I look at a world where you have like a more homogenous group of people that might have a shared faith is probably more stable, probably more productive, probably a little bit more cohesive. But what do you think?
Yeah. No, I think so. There's a lot there. And this is where I guess Christian anarchism has a slight deviation from maybe traditional anarchism. I don't think it's really a deviation. It's just, I think it's an added component. Because like the classical anarchist position would just be that like, no masters, no rulers, and every man is himself. It's a very individualistic thing. Although the anarcho-communists, I guess, are kind of collective, but they're not combining under like a shared religion. I guess Marxism kind of being so it's a little complicated there. But I think for the most part, anarchists today, like they tend to have this very like individualist thing, right? That was Proudhon's thing, right? It's like anyone who claims to have a right to rule over me is a tyrant and a usurper. I declare him my enemy. And I 100% uphold, of course, as an ANCAP, the sovereignty of the individual in terms of individual rights, property rights, the non-aggression principle, things like that. But I think this is sort of like giving the devil his due. The creation of the nation, right, or the nation state, is attempting to deal with a problem, which is that people do tend to be tribal. Like that is a problem. And when people reject anarchy because they go, well, won't it kind of descend into chaos and tribalism? Now, listen, there are some free market ideas for how, like I'm a big fan of Bob Murphy. I think I have his book behind me still.
Had him on the show. Love the dude.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we understand how free markets can promote peaceful interaction, even if people do have apprehensions about each other because of financial incentives and things like that. But I'm sure, I know Bob would agree with this, and I'm sure you would probably agree with this too, that not all cultures are compatible with liberty. The only thing the anarchist has to say is not to say that, like, oh, out of any culture at any time in human history or today, those people would have the kind of culture where liberty would thrive, right? That's not actually the anarchist position. It's just, again, what I already said, which is that central planning doesn't fix that problem. If anything, central planning exacerbates that problem.
Agreed.
Because the incentive structure of the state is not towards lower time preferences. It's not towards a meritocracy. It's the exact opposite of those things. You have public choice theory. You have power and politicians for sale. So it doesn't solve that problem at all. It actually just worsens cultural decay. And I always say to my constitutionalist friends who say the people failed the Constitution, it's like people who were morally good and righteous enough, self-aware enough, able to self-govern to that capacity to make the Constitution work, don't need the Constitution.
Yep.
They could just self-govern without it. The Constitution would just be superfluous at that point, because the Constitution is that flawed at limiting government that it just takes the entirety of the people to like constantly be enforcing it. It's like, well, I mean, that's just one step removed from, hey, enforcing, instead of like everyone constantly enforcing one size fits all contract for a whole land continent, how about you just enforce, all the market contracts that pop up, right? So, which is really just a step removed from federalism, I think. So my point, to, I guess, tie this back to what you said, because I kind of went on a tangent there a bit, the point being that the Christian angle on this is then to say that we do need something to help orient culture into the direction that liberty is more compatible with that culture, can be more sustained. And you could not believe in God at all and just say, like, yeah, like Christianity provides through its stories, through its stability structures, through maybe the way you compare the religions, Christianity to Islam or Judaism. You just think that like Judaism has a scaling problem and Islam has a complicated history with
that's one way to say it.
How it spreads. Not to say that Christianity doesn't have some blemishes, but I think that sometimes the horrors of the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition can be slightly exaggerated, to say the least. So the point being that Christianity has a lot of, as I just mentioned before with 1 Samuel 8, that's just one passage. There are a lot of libertarian upshots, and there is something to the idea, although I think some people take this too far because they confuse institutions with ideas. But there is something to say that Christianity did sort of birth Western culture and a lot of the modern ideas of liberty. Doesn't mean that all the institutions that came out of the Enlightenment are infallible or unquestionable, right? That's my main, like I love Jordan Peterson. Like his one weakness is that he's so blue-pilled on institutions because he can't make that separation, right? A lot of those guys, like from the IDW and whatnot, like it's just like they I don't know if it's quite the genetic fallacy, but they just can't seem to be like, hey, Christianity produced Western culture, which has good things, but it's like it doesn't mean that the institutions are perfect. Like maybe they're better compared to other institutions, but it doesn't mean they're unquestioned goods. But anyway, I just rambled a lot there, so I'll let you ask any follow-up questions you want.
No, that's good stuff. And it makes me wonder, because I'm not in the church anymore. Like I was raised Christian, but I'm not anymore. It's been quite a while since I've even been inside of a church. But it seems like there's a resurgence in Christianity, at least in America. Like it seems like it's on the upswing. And from what I can tell, and this is just like me being on social media and stuff, it feels to me, I perceive that the American churches are more like MAGA. They're very statist, very Republican-ish institutions these days. And so how do you feel about the state of the church right now in America? Like give me the inside view, because it's pretty opaque to me right now.
Yeah, so there's different layers to this. So Catholicism, a bit of a mess. A lot of people like to give the Pope a lot of grief, but actually the Pope is not nearly as liberal as some of the like cardinals and bishops under him, and I actually kind of worry that if the Pope dies, he's going to be replaced by an even far more socially liberal Pope. He's actually not, like, a lot of times he says some bad things, but he's taken out of context a lot. Language translations and things like that aren't always very good. But Catholicism, yeah, it's a bit of a lot of the church is a mixed bag between theological liberalism on one side, even like your classic mainline Protestant churches, like a lot of the Lutheran churches, Presbyterian churches, the Anglican churches, the Church of England, they've kind of been overtaken by theological liberalism. But then a lot of your evangelical, like Baptist or non-denominational, or like the offshoots from mainline Protestantism are hardcore MAGA. There is even a sort of surging kind of MAGA presence, Christian nationalist presence among the big three would be Reformed, Catholicism, and Orthodox have, I wouldn't say like overwhelming, but not insignificant portions of those churches are trending towards Christian nationalism, or at least some form of Christian populism. And a lot of that does seem to coalesce around Trump and the MAGA movement. And as I say as a libertarian, when I'm looking at libertarians coalitioning with the MAGA movement, insofar as Christians are doing so, it's a mixed bag, right? Like there are some things there where I go, okay, I'm happy that more Christians are willing to question if America needs to be the world police, be involved in every possible war and military intervention possible. Insofar as Trump and MAGA are a imperfect but at least a good first step at a repudiation of sort of the neocon establishment, warhawk establishment, which you alluded to, like, remembering those years. I grew up in those years and was formed by them. I find that pleasant, right? Like, it used to be really hard to, like, before it was like you go to church and you hear people like, God is love, and Jesus loves you, and you can repent, and also turn the Middle East to glass.
Bomb Iran.
Yeah, bomb Iran. It's like, hold on, that I can't quite square that circle.
Who would Jesus bomb? Get your bracelet.
Right. Jesus said, "That which you do unto the least of these, you've done unto me, except when you drone strike them."
It's for their own good, Jacob. Stop.
Right. So less of that, but, and I guess like Republicans were always a little bit more anti-immigration, and I'm not even, like, within the libertarian school of thought, you have like open borders, closed borders, a lot of stuff in between. I'm kind of like in that, like, I don't know, in between, because I'm an ANCAP, and I'm like, well, the only answer is abolish it. In the meantime, I don't know. Like, closed borders obviously seems horrible, and open borders kind of seems reckless and horrible too, but I also don't really know, like, it's one of those like no-win situations, and I kind of like I dip my toe in and out of that debate every so often.
For me, that's like the collapsitarian litmus test. Like if you're like don't want to abolish the welfare state and open the borders, it's like, okay, cool. Like I know what side you're on.
Right, exactly. So, but like, even though I'm not like fully open borders, I'm not very fond of the growing nativist and like sometimes overtly racist rhetoric I see coming from some of the MAGA and Christian nationalist crowd. And I'm hesitant to throw those words around after being smeared by people for years for people saying that I was those things, right? And I understand that language is weaponized and that you can, you can be for closed borders and not be those things. But there are also some people who are just quite, and it's usually the people who are very comfortable just saying it out loud. Like, no, I'm a race, I'm a white nationalist, and I think, Europe is for Europeans, and, the black people who are here can stay, but, no more immigrants, and, we got to protect white people and white children and white future and all that. So, which is not my game. And so I haven't seen that infiltrate the church too much, like the mainstream MAGA church yet, but like, the issue is that like that stuff's lurking on the outside and they're like trying to infiltrate, right? So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag there. There definitely has been a surgence of Christianity, but it's a mixed bag because some of it's kind of going in a positive direction where I say it's very gospel oriented, but then a lot of it is going in this political fervor direction where I feel like it's still mixing Christianity with politics in the wrong way. It's just a different way than the neocon establishment did it when I was a kid, right? So it's like, and it comes with some trade-offs, right? It's like, so like, okay, you're better on X, Y, and Z, but you're worse on A, B, and C. So it's like, I can't, the fight changes a bit, but I really can't, like, you know, I don't know, like, celebrate too much.
Got it. And so, have you seen an influx of what I guess I would call cultural Christians, like showing up in church? Because you mentioned Jordan Peterson, I think he's been a big influence around this. I think there's a lot of people, and to his credit, he's attracted more people to Christianity because of his more sophisticated views on it, right? Because there's people like myself who got frankly put off by people in the church making claims that were clearly not literally true. And like, you could talk about what is metaphorical, what is literal. That's a endless game. The Bible is very complex.
You don't think humans and dinosaurs lived with each other?
Yeah, stuff like that. Like the guy that built like the dinosaur world or whatever it was. I can't remember the guy that was in prison and he had ended up doing the dinosaur world thing. I don't know what the whole. Anyway, you get my point. There's some very clearly disprovable claims. The Earth is not 6,000 years old, people, right? So that type of stuff, right? I feel like there's been an evolution in the thinking, largely led by him, to take a more sophisticated, deeper look at the text and what's actually included. What does it mean to have some sort of faith, right? He's led a very, very deep discussion with a bunch of different thinkers on the subject, right? I think he's done a great service, in my view, for the cause of Christianity. Unless, like I said, unless you're a fundamentalist, right? And then I can see that maybe being annoying, because maybe if you have a bunch of people that are attending your church that maybe don't take some things literally that you require, right? As a Bible believing Christian, the sort of core tenets of the gospel. Like if you don't believe those to be actually true, like you're kind of heretical. So how do you view that, man? Number one, are you seeing that? Are you seeing like an influx of that type of person? And number two, like, how do you feel about it, if so?
So I would say, like, in my sphere of the church, I'm not seeing too much of that. But I do see that, I think, primarily with the Catholic and Orthodox Church to some extent. I don't want to, like, overstate it. I'm not trying to punch at my Catholic and Orthodox brothers and sisters. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And I think there are some people who are genuinely coming to faith and are doing so in those churches. I have actually a good friend of mine, online friend, who she recently converted to Catholicism in the last year, and I could tell she was doing it for the right reasons. She had a genuine coming to faith, accepting Christ as her savior. And I'm not one of those Protestants that think that Catholics are satanic or pagan or anything like that. But there are the more traditional wings of Christianity, I think, are attracting some, and it's kind of a spectrum, right? Like, some people might come for more nominal reasons and still find themselves then accepting more and coming to faith later. It's just a mixed bag, because nominal Christianity, cultural Christianity, is a double-edged sword, to where it's what I call the streets are clean kind of Christianity, right? Where it's everything looks good. It's kind of like cultural sanitization to make it look more Christian, but that doesn't last. And that's my concern, is that if all we do, and this is what Jesus meant by pouring old, new wine into old wineskins, kind of. It's like, if the change is not substantial, right, and we just are kind of dressing it up, that's not a multi-generational cultural change that's going to last. I mean, to some extent, that's kind of why the woke left is falling off, right? Because although they were very widespread, their impact was kind of an inch deep. And if Christianity just does the same thing, this is what we're experiencing, is just the ebb and flow of culture, right? And yeah, insofar as I'm a Christian, when the culture ebbs my way, even if it's just in a nominal sense and it doesn't lead to not everyone is actually coming to genuine faith, society might be more appealing to me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to confuse it with the real thing. That's not to say the church isn't growing at all. It's a mixed bag. You got some people who are coming because they're just feeling more safe with the tradition. They've kind of tasted and seen what secularism has, and they don't like it. But again, the mixing of politics into it is part of the problem. And I think some people there's just a danger when we subtract from the gospel to make becoming a Christian about winning political battles. And it's about, like, now, I guess for me it's about winning a political battle, but for me the political battle is abolishing the state, not taking the state over to then reign, like, hey, we're tired of the woke left taking control of the universities and the state and the media and like pushing their way of life down on us, but with the threat of force. So we're just going to fight back and now do the same thing in reverse. It's like, that's not Christianity. And insofar as you take it that route, you subvert what true Christianity is and kind of ensure that the culture war cycle just is going to continue, right? So that's part of my concern. Now, like, I want to touch on one more thing. You brought up the fundamentalists, right? And like, that's a big problem in Christianity. Is you have the fundamentalists on one side, and then the theological liberal Christians on the other side. So you got fundamentalists who say, like, the Bible says 7 days, so it was 7 days, right? And there's different readings of Genesis. I won't get into that. But clearly, like, we don't have to read that as like a, God was giving us a scientific explanation there. Then you have the theological liberal Christians who say, like, well, actually, like, what we need to do is reinterpret the Bible based upon science, which is to kind of, that's not a sophisticated Jordan Peterson reading. That's just kind of like taking all the supernatural and all the actual Christian stuff out of it and just making it like Greek mythology class, but you get dressed up. The Pope, the priests wear funny clothes and stuff like that, right? It's like, it's not really Christianity. It's just kind of like cosplaying at that point, LARPing. I like what's kind of called Christian neo-orthodoxy, which is kind of like saying, like, hey, we can hold on to the historic beliefs of Christianity while also not being in conflict with developments in science. Doesn't mean we, and I think you would agree, doesn't mean we trust the science, trademark, right?
Correct.
Like, as a Protestant, as a non-Catholic, I view scientific institutions like I view the church as an institution. I generally trust the scientific method, and I generally trust the church, and I even love church tradition and teaching and the church fathers, but neither are infallible, right? You have to test them with reason and with the source material and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. A lot of people know about fundamentalists and the liberal Christianity, but neo-orthodoxy is is kind of more of the game I think Christians need to be playing.
Got it. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because that was one of the things that frustrated me when I was a Christian. There was a lot of that where it was just complete denial of things that were clearly true. And to me, that struck me as, I don't even know what to make of it. Is it willful ignorance? Is it like I'm not sure what's driving it, but it seems almost like at the time when I was religious, I was like, that's almost insulting to God, because reality exists, right? And the way that we know things about objective reality most of the time is through the scientific method. It's through experimentation. It's through validation of experiment over time, and it's updating our models of the universe as more information comes in, as that we get more tests, and we like. This should be the way, and it should be. These seems like they should be separate domains, right? Like you said, like you should have that scientific endeavor, and its job is to uncover empirical fact, and then the religious domain is that's typically the realm of values, right? Like and also ontological claims about deities and how we should behave and that sort of thing, and those two should be able to coexist separately. And when I was in the church, I definitely saw this utter rejection of science. So things that were clearly true, people were just like, nope, not true. Sky's green. Like, and it really put me off. That's one of the things that actually drove me away pretty strongly.
Yeah, I went through some of that growing up, and I was kind of fed a lot of the propaganda. I believed, I made the dinosaur joke because I believed as a kid that dinosaurs and humans roamed the earth together. And listen, like, I think that you can have, so there's like reasonable and unreasonable takes, right? Is it reasonable to go, all right, listen, I don't think the Earth was created in 7 days. I don't think that Earth is literally 6,000 years old. All right. Does that mean that the modern scientific theories and carbon dating and all this are infallible and give us a perfect picture of how old the Earth is and how old humans are and, everything we know about ancient dinosaurs and human development is 100% true? I don't know. And I think even honest scientists would say, like, well, they don't know. These are theories. They develop over time. And the stuff that scientists are saying now could, in 30 years, be completely, like overwritten with more discoveries, right? And I think that the problem is you do have dogmatics on both sides of that schism, right? As much as Christians can be fundamentalists, as I alluded to before, a lot of people are just, they don't stop being religious, like we've talked about. They just, they find that same, like the atheist Karen talking about wearing a mask in July 2020 when you were walking outside on the sidewalk had the same religious dogmatic fervor as the Southern Fundamental Baptist holding the "you're going to hell" sign, speaking from a megaphone on the corner, right? Like, it's just the exact same religious dogma and fervor, and I just don't, that's certainly a problem. I think that we've lost, and this is kind of the postmodern quandary, right? Is that, like, we've kind of, like, we're lost right now in this moment in time where we kind of know enough to know how little we know with certainty. And so then people go, well, because we can't know anything with certainty, what can we know, right? And you can go down a lot of rabbit holes with that. But I think that I love the way I don't think it's just Jordan Peterson, but the way he puts it is that, like, yes, there are many and almost infinite amount of interpretations to a lot of, how we read text, how we interpret data, but that doesn't mean there's infinite plausible interpretations, right? I think that's true for science. I think that's true for religion. There are good faith disagreements about what certain texts of scripture say, but then, like, we can rank order them to go, like, here are the more plausible ones, and here are the ones that are just, like, they don't make sense. And that's, like, the fundamentalists treat the entire Bible like it's just one text, which is ahistoric. The Bible is a collection of different texts written by different authors at different times. We don't even know who some of the authors are with certainty. And I believe in the inspiration of Scripture. I believe it's all God's Word, but I don't believe that because it's all God's Word that then I read each text the same way or read it as science. Because it's not like it was written as a science textbook. Like, the point of the Bible was not like, hey, guys, I'm giving you Genesis, so you really, like, the most important thing you get out of this book is that you know how old the Earth is.
Right.
Is that you believe that dinosaurs existed with humans, right? Like, that's not the point of the book. It's not the style of writing it was. You have to, like, understand how ancient writing was done, how Hebrew works, how Greek works, and I'm very put it this way, I probably know more than the average person on Greek and Hebrew, but it's one of those things, like I said before, it's like I just know enough to know how stupid I am on those things, because interpreting ancient languages, like, it's hard enough to know, like, because, like, you have modern Hebrew, right? But modern Hebrew isn't ancient Hebrew. They had to kind of change Hebrew around in the modern context, and reading ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek and Aramaic and all that, and translating it to modern contexts, it's a mess. And so you got to approach it with humility. The fundamentalists don't do that. But then, to give the fundamentalists their due, they understand the value of the texts, and they see the liberal types just completely undermining everything and saying that, oh, this is all just made up, and we're just going to reinterpret it to say that you can trans your child. And so it's like,
how do you know that, man? Like, this is the thing that I've always struggled with, because it feels like it's a impossible endeavor to understand what the texts say, let alone what they actually mean. I don't know if you saw, but you see the Danny Jones podcast with Ammon Hillman?
No, I did not.
I would check that out. That dude is a legitimate Greek expert. I'm not sure what the field. There was some field of study that
Who did he talk to?
Ammon Hillman.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's like an anti-Christian dude too, and he's making a bunch of claims about what the Greek text in the Septuagint, is that what I can't pronounce.
The Sepid. Now
Whatever.
I can't
It's
pronounce
a New
it.
Testament
I know what you're
text.
talking about. It's the Greek Old Testament.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever that is, and he was making some what sounded to be very credible claims about the text, and it sounds insane. When he delivers, he's a very like. Watch this episode. You need to DM me like after you watch this. I want to get your take on this. But he makes a very compelling case, at least to a lay person like myself. Although it was very theatrical, like he put a Pope hat on, they put candles on, like. I think he even had a debate. He was on twice, once with like whatever the most famous exorcist dude is, and those two went at it a little bit. But when I was watching that episode, I was thinking to myself, like these people have studied this text forever, and they can't agree on it. Like how the hell do we know? Like it feels to me like almost like a hopeless endeavor. Maybe I'm missing something important, but want to get your take on that.
So there's a lot there. In terms of we'll focus on the Greek because the Hebrew is a whole other can of worms, which, again, I know enough to know how much I'm ignorant of that. I know a bit more about the Greek than I do the Hebrew, despite my being Jewish. I can make a joke about that. So with Greek, the reason we can have some, not like 100% certainty, but a lot of confidence is, one, there is a large abundance. And I mean, like, when you look at the New Testament document that we have manuscripts of, from within 100 years of Christ and then with even 400 or 500 years of Christ, and we compare that to other documents of antiquity, like the Bible is here, the New Testament Bible and the books of the Bible are here, and then like the next document in terms of what we have is much further down in terms of like the gap of how many copies we have. We have many copies, not all of them complete, but enough fragments and things here and there that we are able to track the manuscript record. And although there's often reports of like, oh, but there's like thousands of errors, a lot of them are like where people put periods or where people put, in Greek, there's like this thing called the movable noon, I think it is, which doesn't make a huge difference, but it's just kind of like a marker or like an accent which people can put in different spots, or sometimes it's just like obvious typos, and that accounts for like 90 to 95% of like what people say are differences, and then the rest are like usually not differences that make a huge difference, or like there's like two or three that are like there's extra endings added to, I think, the book of Mark and things like that, but there's more consistency across the hundreds of years of these varying manuscripts, and then there are differences, which gives us some confidence in terms of like that they haven't been altered or changed that much. And then in terms of translating the Greek, a lot of that is put it this way, there is, from atheist scholars such as like Bart Ehrman, there is question over whether some of the sayings attributed to Jesus are things he said. Bart Ehrman thinks that some of the things are made up later and they're legend. But what's not in dispute is how do we translate the Greek words on the text of these manuscripts. Generally, there's not huge discrepancies, and again, sometimes
this,
there's
sorry
like
to interrupt, but this is why I pinged you the link on DM and Twitter, man. Like, check this out. So he's actually making a claim, and he is apparently a linguist, somebody who has studied Greek in depth, and he's making very specific claims about the meanings of some of the text. And so that's and maybe we don't need to go over this now. And I know you haven't reviewed the material. But watching that episode made me think, it's like, wow, like, are there infinite interpretations?
I don't know this guy. I will say, like, Bart Ehrman is an ex-Christian turned atheist, and his mission is to, he doesn't hate Christianity. He says, like, Christians just need to accept that these are myths and that a lot of the things we think about Jesus were made up. But even he will attest to, like, he'll often say, well, Jesus was most certainly a real person. Here are some of the sayings we can know for sure that he said, and he'll even agree with the things I said in terms of the amount of manuscripts we have and just the ability to reliably translate them. And listen, because Greek's a weird language because it's not like English where we have very precise sentence structures, and we can do them in kind of different ways, but like there are a limited number of ways to order words to make a coherent sentence, right? Like I can't just jumble the English sentence into any order, right? Like if I say I ran down the street and then say street, I down ran, like that, like you might be able to kind of remember, oh, did you mean to say this? But like if you just wrote those words on a paper, you'd be like, well, this is just a jumbled mess. But Greek, when you actually, if you go like, you can go online, just look up a Greek to a Greek text analysis and see, like, side by side, the Greek words in the order they're written and the English words that they best translate to, and it's a grammatical mess when you try to read it in English. And there's not even consistency in how people, and Greek people would often order things, the sentence structure, in order to kind of provide emphasis for certain words. There's also different words have different gendered uses of them, a male and female form of them. And then there's just also, with any translation from ancient languages to modern languages, you do have the problem of that, like, so you have it both ways. You have sometimes concepts and words we have in English that there's not a good Greek parallel to, and the other way around. There's like words and concepts in Greek there's not a good English parallel to, or sometimes in Greek there's like one word that means 5 different things depending on the context, and in English we have like 5 different words for those different concepts, but then like you're reading the New Testament and you're seeing that word used in wildly different contexts, and so it can be a bit confusing. So anyway, yeah, I'd be happy to check the link out you said, but I'm not saying it's not difficult and that there's not like room for error, but I don't know if like, I don't know, I'd be skeptical that like if there was that much error, that, put it this way, like when you read, there's a reason why there's so many different translations of the Bible, right? Because you can have either a textual translation or a contextual translation or a hybrid. The textual translations basically say, first we're going to go word for word, and then we're only going to make small edits to the grammar to get it, keep it as close to the original as we can, but comprehensible in English, right? So that's a textual translation. The contextual translations go more line by line or thought for thought, and they don't care about keeping the exact word structure or exact words that were used. They just try to convey the meaning. And then you have hybrids that kind of like say, well, we kind of try to do a little bit of both. That's why there's so many different translations. But it's not like if you pick up an NIV version and I'm picking up a King James version that like I'm going to say, oh, my Bible says that Jesus rose on the 3rd day, and your Bible said that, Jesus went down and fought Hades in the underworld and then came out with a flame. Like they're still telling more or less. Like, so I like, are there things on the margins? Maybe, but I don't think it's like, it's not so difficult that suddenly we have like 50 different Bibles saying 50 different things from the same Greek manuscript. So that's my take on it without looking at the source material.
Got it. The reason I'm bringing this up is actually more central than that. It's like a real central question of what the word Christ is. I think that's one of the things that he focuses on. And his claim is that the Greek text is actually referring to a drug. And and first of all, normally I would see something like that and be like, all right, crazy person, sort of dismiss it out of hand. But a couple of years ago, are you familiar with Brian Murarescu's work? He wrote that book called Immortality Key. Like he worked with the Vatican and some archaeological.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So he was on Rogan, and they essentially excavated very, very early Christian churches, and they found evidence that the communion wine essentially was a mixed wine, and he references some texts as well. I think he's a linguist as well. And these mixed wines had they had them chemically tested and analyzed from the archaeological dig, and they had ergotine in it, which is basically similar to LSD. It's derived from the ergot fungus, which grows on wheat. And Brian Mirarescu's claim is that the early Christian churches, like they had psychedelics as part of their communion, like that was central to that. And so I had those two sort of, touch points that seemed to confirm each other, and so that's why I originally, because my ears kind of perked up and I listened to that episode. So anyway, that was the reason why I was interested in it. For me, psychedelics are one of those things that kind of led me in a more spiritual direction, where I'm thinking I'm open now. Where I was completely closed off to it before. That was a very powerful experience, and so my little antenna came up, and I was kind of like, I wonder if there's something to that. So I didn't mean to get completely in the ditch with this one, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, no, I'd have to look at his specific claims. I mean, as far as I know, Christ comes from Greek words to mean like the anointed one, and like the root word of Christos is I can't remember the root word, but the root word of Christos basically means to anoint. And so then it's like anointed one is what Christos
exactly.
is.
That's what he was saying, is it is some, and please, I'm sorry, I don't remember the details, but he was saying there's something inherent in that word. It meant it was like a pharmacological ointment, right? There was some drug that was associated with it. So we won't resolve it here, man, but I would love to get your take after watching that episode, because I'm ignorant on the subject, but it certainly captured my attention. And I got to say, as Ammon Hillman is an entertaining human being. Like, he's almost like a performance artist plus a scholar in one. So it's a quite entertaining exchange.
Yeah.
Especially
on the psychedelic stuff, because people have also talked about like the burning bush perhaps being a reference to some kind
DMT,
of psychedelics. Yeah. I obviously don't believe that in terms of what the biblical narrative says. I will say just my take on psychedelics in general is that I'm not closed to the idea that they perhaps, give people some sort of spiritual experience. Never done them myself, so I can't say. I know people who have come to Christ and even overcome real difficult mental health issues, including gender dysphoria, because of psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably more open-minded, probably because I'm a libertarian, right?
Right.
More open-minded
about
about
the
potential use of psychedelics in both medicinal and potentially spiritual uses. I know the Eastern Orthodox, because they're a bit more, they're the more mystical side of Christianity, and they're even more open than a lot of us here in the West are. So I'm not totally closed off to there being a connection between the psychedelics and the spiritual realm. But like anything, like there are good and bad ways to go about doing that, and I don't think it's a substitute. I think it can be mind-opening for some people, but then I don't think it's a substitute for what I think true spiritual transformation is, which I think that can only, come through Christ. But it's possible that maybe psychedelics are the gateway drug.
I really think they are, dude. I gotta say, I know you haven't taken any, but as somebody who has, and I'm not a drug guy, by the way. Like, I'm not somebody who did any substances. I never drank. I did it for mental health reasons, because I have a trauma history and had a therapist that kind of backdoor recommended I might take a look at it. And it was transformational, man. And that was the first time that I've ever had like what I would consider a spiritual experience. Even though I've been to church tons and tons of times, that's something that's pretty hard to escape. And the more that I look around the sort of religious landscape, you look at I went to Istanbul and I went to the old mosques, and I would look at the architecture and I would be like, these people were tripping. Like these, like I look.
Yeah, and so were the Greek. What were they called? The women who were in the one temple with the gases that would come up. I forget what they were called. But yeah, there's a lot of. Yeah, certainly there's a big connection across many cultures and religions with different psychoactive substances. I think that's hard to deny.
Yeah, and it feels like, to me, when I look at that landscape, it feels like there's that common element. And I think they all sort of sprung from that same thing, which leads me to believe that there's a potential, legitimate spiritual application here. There might be something that we're missing. So anyway, I'm just hypothesizing.
Well, put it this way, it can't be worse than SSRIs and
Boy, tell me about it.
Benzos and all that, right? Like, I'd rather people try psychedelics than a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And what's cool about it is that it's not like a habituating type of thing. Like there's nobody I know that does 8 grams of mushrooms and is like, oh, I'm going to do that tomorrow. Like that's usually a thing where you do it once and you're like, I'm good for like 5 years, man. It's sort of like it's that
Right.
moment, that catalyzing moment where you're like have that experience. You're like, wow, now what do I do with this? You got to sort of unpack it. You have to figure out what things mean. And I think I'm still in that phase, man. Even though I did psychedelics for the first time, probably like 6 years ago. Like I'm still recovering from
Well,
that one. I'm
so
still,
I'm always interested to talk about this stuff with people who've done psychedelics as someone who hasn't, but who, just as a Christian, thinks who has experienced things I would say are just profoundly spiritual and hard to say. Like I don't think it was just music or emotions. I mean, I've had spiritual experiences that weren't in church, had nothing,
hmm
like there was nothing around me, and I don't know. And I know you're kind of like agnostic, seeking you don't know. Um, I don't know how people can have the human experience of like just even just like our basic emotions of joy and happiness, and no matter what you believe, it's just hard for me to understand the strict materialist worldview. Because like I can understand like not knowing what you believe, and I can even understand thinking like, well, maybe there's spiritual forces, but I don't know if there's one God or anything like that. Like, but for people that just like we're just atoms, right? I'm just like I just have a hard time like understanding how people think that, or if they even really think that, or if they're just saying it. Because to me, it just seems so like how could like you can't. For me, it's hard to say. There's two things. One, if you've ever been in love, you ever had children, it's hard for me to be like, yeah, that's just brain chemicals, man. And like the other thing is like, if it is just brain chemicals, like why do we care so much? Like I just don't like I understand the biological evolutionary arguments for morality and stuff like that, but like these aren't just like preferences. These are like like you feel it in your bones. You like most of us know things are evil or good, and the people who don't know that you know we know there's something wrong with them, that they don't know that things are right and wrong. So I don't know. It's just I find the psychedelic stuff is interesting because it seems to at least be able to get people over the hump of like like, oh, I don't know if there's anything spiritual, where they're like, okay, like I'm willing to admit that like spiritual reality is a thing even if I don't know what I believe about it.
yeah. And I got to say, Jacob, like if you want to get people interested in spiritual topics, that is the front door, man. Like that is something that I could guarantee anybody does an ayahuasca experience. They take DMT, they take mushrooms with a sufficient dose, and they're going to be questioning everything. They're going to be like, "Oh, this," because it really is. It's almost like the universe just pulls back a curtain and says, "Here, let me let you in on this secret," and you're like, "Whoa!" Like it is mind blowing, and you're confronted directly in a visceral way that you can't escape. Like there's something going on. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something going on here, and it completely blows your mind open, and you're ready to explore possibilities. So, I guess the other religions can fight out who gets to keep these people, but I'm telling you, like it's I don't know anybody who's done a sufficient dose of psychedelics who's like, no, I'm still just absolute hard atheist. There's nothing there. It's all I was on drugs. Like it's too powerful of an experience, and it's too real of an experience.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. I certainly think. Yeah, I wonder how that competition is going to go. I mean, I I guess it's a little cheesy, and I guess I have my biases that I can't quite account for, but the most single profound thing that impacts me spiritually is, and this is like someone who knows Jordan Peterson can appreciate this, because I think this impacts him, even though he doesn't. I think hasn't like really taken that full leap of faith. But I just think I wonder what your thoughts on this. Like, and maybe you don't know all of it, which is fine. But even as much as you do know the Christian story, I just think it's hard to look at that story and see just like the way it stands out in comparison to other religions and myths, and then also to see how like the archetypes are patterns that repeat, that all seem to kind of point to that. I mean, like it's everywhere. Like I mean, like every major motion picture that has like real emotional weight ends up with someone doing like a poor man's version of what Christ did, right? Like, I mean, the end of the whole Avengers Infinity War thing was Tony Stark basically sacrificing himself to save the universe. I mean, it's just like, and there's something about that that it drives us, it compels us, and I don't know, like, and why, right? Like, why does that story have significance to us? And I think that the fact that Christianity has at its central theme, not just this, hey, there's a rule book of everything you have to do to get to heaven. It's actually the opposite. It's the God gave people a rule book to get to heaven, and they were incapable of following it. And the core gospel message is that Jesus himself, God incarnate, comes down and decides, you know what, like, I love my creation so much that even though they hate me, even though they have rebelled against me and want nothing to do with me, I'm going to take on the punishment of their sins, and I'm going to die in their place. I mean, that's just, let me put it this way. I don't understand how human minds would write that. Because first of all, it doesn't make humanity look good. Like, we're not impressive in the Christian narrative at all. We're completely helpless, and we're completely reliant on a merciful God. And I know there's all sorts of other questions you could bring up about the question of evil and the question of, like, hell and things like that. But at the very least, like, there's just, I don't know, something about that story that I find to be especially compelling, that that I think for those who are searching, you know, like, if you've had spiritual experiences from whatever, anything, right? Psychedelics included, and you're curious about what religion has to offer, I've yet to have anyone present a good argument to me to be like, you know, no, here's this religion that has this story that's way more compelling than that, right? Again, and none of this is like, it's not an argument for why Christianity is true. It's just why it's why, like, I can't argue faith. Faith is faith, but that's why I have faith, because that when I read and understood the gospel message, that transformed my life. And I can't, like, if you want evidence, that's the evidence I have. It's just my life and how it's been transformed by the words on the pages of the 1,000-year-old story.
Yeah, totally. And I think Jordan Peterson does call out that sort of a hierarchy of religious, you know, story and myth, right? And that sort of rose to the pinnacle, and that sacrificial motif that is embedded or endemic in Christianity is like, it's really valuable. Like, it's one of those things that society has chosen as a valuable collection of stories. And to answer your question, maybe to give a less satisfying answer to you, a less spiritual answer, is I've thought deeply about this, and I wonder if there's something about that redemptive story that is good for us individually and good for us as a society. Meaning, we all know we do bad stuff, and if you have this sort of transcendent cure, or this you know, sort of catch-all that's going to, you know, redeem you in some fashion, to quell your conscience, or even to allow people back into society. I think we've seen people do some pretty horrible things, and it feels like in society there's some level of deeds which are just unforgivable. Like, we all are like, this, yo, you crossed the line, there's no coming back from this. I wonder if that sort of spiritual, you know, last resort as a method of sort of, you know, applying cultural and individual forgiveness, so people can stay in society or re-enter society or be redeemed, or, you know, that whole penance thing, and make atonement for their sins, like, or at least you know, that sacrificial motif. We all sort of, if we're Christians, we believe that that's been atoned for, and then the person's going to get out there and try to do better. Like, there might be an evolutionary component to this that's necessarily not spiritual, but it also might be spiritual too. Who knows?
Right, and like I said at the beginning, I think it's kind of both and, to be honest, because I think, I mean, I don't know, but that would be almost a whole other conversation. I think we're kind of running out of time here as it is.
Yeah, we're up against time, so I want to give you a chance to talk about the book, man. You said you got something in the LCI that you wanted to plug.
Yeah, so my podcast, the Biblical Anarchy Podcast, you can check that out at biblicalanarchypodcast.com, and that's produced by the Libertarian Christian Institute, and we do more than just podcasts. We do articles, blogs, then we also have a lot of books have already come out, including, again, for those who are watching on video, this is our main flagship book, Faith Seeking Freedom. This is Libertarian Christian Answers to Tough Questions, so it kind of, like, in about 100... 20 pages, tries to answer the basic questions that Christians have about libertarianism and that libertarians might have about Christianity, right? So kind of both and. We're actually working on a second edition of this book. But right now we have 2 books that just came out that might interest people in your audience. One's called The Anarchist, Anabaptist, written by Cody Cook, another colleague at LCI. He connects kind of the Anabaptist tradition, which people probably be most familiar with, like Mennonites, the Amish, and whatnot, with political anarchism. And then the other book we just came out called A House Divided, and it's about the church's response to the COVID lockdowns and lessons that can be derived from that. So both of those books are. The Anarchist Anabaptist just came out, and House Divided is available for pre-order. So you go to libertarianchristians.com if anyone there is interested, and check both of those things out and check our shows out as well. And other than that, man, thanks for having me on. This was very fun conversation, and happy to come back on sometime and dive more into any of that.
Absolutely. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, dude. Thank you for coming on. You're one of the good guys in the libertarian space, and I'll say that to anybody. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Bye.